work then. This preacher had a hard time choosing images this week. There are so many out in the world or on my Facebook feed. Do I choose the Queen's 90th birthday? At least we got that Gustav Holst tune that also goes to I Vow to Thee, My Country, which is one of theirs. You could talk about Earth Day. Today is also John Muir's feast day. I could talk about the election. There are just lots of different images, and then you've got the death of Prince. And so, how do you work all these things in? And it's impossible, but I'll go with the music metaphor for a little while longer, if that's possible, because a musician normally chooses 3 different notes to make a chord, and there's a whole circle of chord progression to make a decent piece of music, and a harmonious sound. And with enough practice and any skill, a preacher can do that with verses of Scripture. Sometimes we do that better than others, but I'm going to pluck out 3 verses and let them hang in the air and see if they will make a melodious sound by the end of it. The first followers of Jesus found it hard to imagine having a relationship with God without keeping all of the other Jewish traditions, the rituals they had learned. Peter was one of those people at first. Jesus called him the rock, you remember that, upon which the church was to be built. Then Peter sees this amazing image, right, coming down on this mechanical screen that goes up and down like a big PowerPoint projector, sees it 3 times, no less. He takes the message to a bunch of Gentiles, and they're unclean, uncircumcised people who weren't doing the same things that the Jews were doing. And he sat and he ate with them, because that is what the vision told him to do. And he baptized them and they believed. And so here's the first verse of this morning's sermon chord. The Spirit told me not to make a distinction between them and us. In the book of Revelation, John tells of the vision he sees, albeit not on a projection screen, of this new heaven and this new earth. He's actually writing this poem about the end of the world as we know it, in which he describes the triumph of God, the time when the ways of God will finally become our ways. And in this vision, Jesus, the one sitting on the throne, says, "See, I am making all things new." The second note of our chord. And the Last Supper is the final reading. Jesus gathered around the table at the Passover meal with his friends. You remember, we hear this story on Maundy, Thursday. It's the same night Judas, his friend, betrays him, and Jesus is handed over to death. At the table, Jesus tells his friends that he is leaving them. But before that, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I loved you. You also should love one another. The final note of our chord. The Spirit told me not to make a distinction between them and us. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Behold, I am making all things new. A friend of mine told me yesterday about the Passover supper he got to attend just on Friday night at the home of a rabbi in Washington. Among the extraordinary guests were Jess and her husband, Patrick. 3 years ago last week, Jess and Patrick were at the finish line at the Boston Marathon, cheering on the runners as they crossed that line when the bombs exploded. Jess lost both of her legs and Patrick his left one. It took an act of Congress to allow Patrick and Jess to go to Walter Reed for treatment, as they are civilians. They've been there for a couple of years now, having surgeries and therapy, learning to walk again. Through lots of hard work and tears, they are making progress. You may have heard the news from the Boston Marathon last week. Patrick ran and completed the marathon with the help of his running blade attached to his leg. Now he is called the Blade Runner. And after he finished the race, he pushed Jess across the finish line in her wheelchair. Last April, my friend recounted the story of how the marathon bomber, the one who survived, went to sentencing. And Jess had just finished her surgery, but she and Patrick wanted to say something at that sentencing, so they went to Boston. In our darkest moments and deepest sadness, they said, we think of inflicting the same types of harm on him. We wish that he could feel the searing pain and terror that the four beautiful souls felt before their death, as well as the harsh reality of discovering mutilated or missing legs. If there is anyone who deserves the ultimate punishment, it is the defendant. However, we must overcome the impulse for vengeance. We must overcome the impulse for vengeance. The first impulse Peter might have had was not to go there, not to eat with the unclean Gentiles. When you encounter someone who is different from you or someone who disagrees with you, what is your first impulse? Do you want to turn the other way or stop listening? Jesus taught and preached that our first impulse is to love, because God's first impulse is not to judge us, but to welcome us with arms full of grace. So too we are commanded to love one another. It is the only way all things can ever be made new. This afternoon I have to start another home improvement project, hopefully better than the one I tried last weekend when I failed spectacularly at taking apart my lawnmower to clean the carburetor. I did get it put back together before I had to accept defeat and take it to the repairman, who said to stick to preaching. This afternoon, I have to tackle my back stone patio. I've put the task off for several years now. The problem has only gotten worse. There is a crack at the top of the steps from where the water flows down the road to the driveway and all the way down our back way. Water has washed all the debris out of that crack and frozen and thawed and cracked. And now it is a tripping hazard, so I have to chip away the old mortar and in some places even take up the stones and reset them in new cement. I have to fill in the voids that have washed away. It is not going to be easy to bring those stones back together. I'm surely going to hit my thumb with the hammer. And I have to remember exactly how the stones were turned so that they fit back together. And then there's the mortar. It has to be mixed just right, not too thick, not too soupy. And then you just start stuffing it in there. You let it dry just enough to wipe it away so that it looks pretty and smooth to welcome guests to our summer cookouts. At least the way that looks on YouTube when they show the recipe. Now perhaps my first impulse was to have the slate patio and walkway ripped up with a bulldozer and paved with new smooth concrete. But that is too easy and would destroy the rest of my yard in the process. And it would be plain ugly. And yet the only way things will ever be made new is if someone chooses to love first and put it back together. Overcoming our first impulse to turn the other way is hard. Love is the mortar we must use to bring us back together again. Then and only then will all things be made new. Another friend of mine is pounding the sidewalks of Baltimore City this weekend, trying to get people to the polls to take part in the healing of our city. I told her how I wished we were doing more as a congregation to help rebuild Baltimore. But we've been so busy, I said, bringing together a Lutheran and Episcopal church. What can we do now to help? I said. Oh, she said, that is exactly what you can do now. Keep coming together. You are an example of how two different groups of people can overcome their initial impulses and differences in order to achieve a common goal. Keep doing what you're doing, loving each other and becoming better together. The Spirit told me not to make a distinction between them and us. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Behold, I am making all things new. The word cord actually comes from the Middle English accord. The original sense was agreement and reconciliation. Sometimes we don't get it right. The mortar is not the right consistency. We may have to chip it out and start over. I may have to call and ask for professional help. But this is the beautiful, harmonious sound that the world will hear when we start doing it together, filling the cracks and bringing our beautiful stones together to make the mosaic, the patio, the place where the table is set, the vision on that screen where God is making all things new through us as we love one another. Amen.